Welcome to the deep dive. You know, AI is becoming more and more a part of our lives, and it's raising some really important questions like how do we make sure this tech actually serves humanity?
Absolutely. And you shared this really fascinating white paper from the World Economic Forum on AI value alignment. That's exactly what we're going to try to unpack today.
Nice.
The goal is really to get a handle on what it means to build AI that benefits all of us.
Exactly. And this isn't just some abstract ethics chat, is it? It's about understanding the actual steps, the practicalities of getting core human values into the AI that's shaping everything.
Yeah, things like fairness, privacy, autonomy.
Just fundamentals. We'll look at the key ideas, how it works in the real world, and even some of the red lines they're talking about.
And for everyone listening, getting your head around AI value alignment gives you this crucial window into how our basic values are being, hopefully, woven into these incredibly powerful systems. This paper gives a great framework for that.
Okay, so let's dive in. What does AI value alignment actually mean? Like in plain English?
Well, at its heart, it's about making sure AI systems act in ways that line up with human values, ethical principles, and societal norms.
So making sure it plays by our rules, essentially.
Pretty much. Making sure it operates in a way we find acceptable, beneficial as people and as a society.
Okay, guiding AI to act right. But human values, that sounds broad. What specific kinds of principles are we talking about here?
The paper really zeroes in on some key ones.
Yeah.
Justice, privacy, autonomy, respect. These are kind of the ethical bedrock, you could say.
The big ones.
Yeah. Safeguarding dignity, rights, making interactions fair, respecting people's choices.
Okay, that sounds straightforward enough, but I can already see a snag. How do we deal with the fact that different cultures or even different people might see those values differently?
That's a really sharp point. And the paper definitely acknowledges that. While there might be core universal values, how they're understood, how they're put into practice, that can vary hugely.
Right.
To use a simple example, respect. In one culture, maybe a handshake shows respect. In another, you might avoid physical contact altogether.
Ah, okay. That little handshake example says a lot, doesn't it? So if values can be that squishy, how do we even start translating them into solid rules an AI can follow?
Yeah, that's the challenge. The paper really hammers home the need for processes that are explicit and auditable.
Explicit and auditable. Okay.
It's not enough to just tell the AI, be fair. You need clear, documented steps showing how you get from the value fairness to specific rules the AI uses. And crucially, you need to be able to check that process, see how it happened.
So it's not just wishful thinking. You need a clear trail, a verifiable path from the value to the code almost.
Exactly, and transparency is key there. The other big thing they stress is active participation from all the stakeholders.
Why is that so critical?
Well, it ensures the way values are interpreted and turned into AI behavior actually makes sense and aligns with the values of the people the AI is supposed to serve.
Yeah.
You can't just have a few developers deciding this stuff in a back room.
Makes total sense. You need the people affected to be involved. Now, the white paper flags some key questions about this whole alignment thing, right? What are the main hurdles they're looking at?
Yeah, they lay out a really core set of questions. First, what specific human values should we be aligning AI with? Second, what does alignment actually look like in practice for an AI?
Okay.
Third, how do we achieve this alignment during development? Fourth, how do we check or verify that an AI is aligned? Fifth, how do we keep an eye out for, drift, the AI becoming misaligned after it's deployed?
Right, because things change.
Exactly. And that leads to the last one. How do we update the alignment if our own societal values shift over time?
Those are huge questions. And that point about values changing.
Wow.
What we think is okay now might be totally different later.
Precisely. And the paper also notes how cultural differences can shift priorities. Maybe one society puts a huge emphasis on individual privacy, while another focuses more on collective harmony, maybe sharing data for the common good.
Though different priorities.
These different viewpoints absolutely have to be considered, especially for AI that's going to be used globally.
So a single universal approach to alignment probably won't cut it. How does the paper suggest dealing with these cultural variations?
Well, it points out that values exist at different levels, individual, organizational, national, even global, like in treaties. And that creates a real challenge if an AI is, say, deployed globally, but its alignment was mostly defined at a national level somewhere specific.
Ah, the alignment might not fit the new context.
It might not translate well at all.
Okay, this is definitely complex. Let's try and make it more concrete. The paper uses some real-world examples. That hospital diagnosis AI one seems useful.
Yes, that's a great one. In healthcare, an AI helping with diagnosis needs to respect core values like patient autonomy, the patient's right to make informed choices, right?
Hmm.
Plus, privacy of their health data, fairness so recommendations aren't biased, and crucially, human agency. The doctor has the final say.
Right. The AI supports the doctor, it doesn't just take over. That seems vital for keeping things grounded and accountable. The paper also mentions information asymmetry here. What's that about?
That's the knowledge gap between patients and doctors. For people to trust an AI diagnostic tool, they need some understanding of how it works, how it gets its recommendations. Transparency helps bridge that gap.
Makes sense. You don't want it to be a total black box making life or death suggestions, so how do these values actually get built into the system?
The paper gives some practical examples. For autonomy, maybe decision support tools that clearly show the AI's reasoning and let patients add their preferences. Privacy means things like encryption, secure storage.
Standard tech stuff.
Yeah, and fairness means training on diverse data to cut down bias. Human agency means designing it as a tool, not the ultimate decision maker. Plus, you have operational stuff like complying with regulations, SHIPO in the US, for instance, technical robustness, making sure it works reliably, and interoperability,
Interoperability.
making sure it can actually connect with and use the hospital's existing systems like electronic health records. It has to fit into the workflow.
Got it. So it's a mix of ethics and just practical system design. How do they check if it's actually doing all this in practice?
There's a whole toolkit. Patient satisfaction surveys can check feelings about autonomy and privacy. Security audits verify data protection. Bias metrics look for unfair patterns. External audits give an objective view. Performance monitoring tracks accuracy, and interoperability testing makes sure it plays nice with other systems.
Okay, a pretty thorough checklist. Now, thinking about cultural differences again, how might they change how these values apply in a hospital?
Patient autonomy is a key example they use. In
Hmm.
some cultures, it's very individualistic the patient makes the call. In others, family involvement is normal, even expected.
Ah,
Where an AI system needs to be flexible. Maybe the decision tools allow for family input where that's the cultural norm, rather than rigidly enforcing a purely individual model.
that's a subtle but really important difference. It's not just one definition of autonomy. Okay, what about the AI credit scoring example? What's the main value issue there?
For credit scoring, the paper really focuses on fairness. The critical thing is using training data that represents everyone, all demographic groups.
Because financial behavior isn't uniform.
Exactly. It's tied to all sorts of social, economic, cultural factors.
Yeah.
If your training data is skewed, your AI could easily end up being discriminatory.
Leading to unfair loan denials, for example.
Precisely. So they mentioned using audits and specific fairness metrics like the disparate impact ratio to check if the AI is disadvantaging certain groups.
Okay, measuring fairness. And the third example, autonomous vehicles. What's the top value there?
Unsurprisingly, it's human safety, making sure self-driving cars prioritize keeping people safe, occupants, pedestrians, everyone. This means tons of rigorous testing, real-time monitoring.
And adapting to different places.
Yes, absolutely. Safety standards aren't the same everywhere. Think urban versus rural driving or just different countries with different traffic laws, different behaviors.
Like how close people follow or jaywalking norms.
Exactly. So the AI needs redundancy in critical systems, constant monitoring, and it has to adapt its safety parameters to local conditions, speed limits, how pedestrians act. They monitor this with things like uptime metrics and reviewing any incidents carefully.
These examples really drive home that value alignment isn't just theory. It has real consequences for how AI gets built and used. Okay, let's shift gears to the how. The paper talks about technical and organizational stuff. What's the interplay there?
Yeah, it stresses that you can't just code your way to value alignment. It's a mix. On the organizational side, you need things like really analyzing where and how the AI will be used.
Understanding the context?
Right. And talking to lots of different stakeholders to get their perspectives on values. Plus, training developers and users so everyone's on the same page about what values the AI is supposed to uphold.
So, setting the stage and getting buy-in, what about the technical side?
That's where you get into things like carefully choosing and cleaning the training data. There are also more advanced techniques like inverse reinforcement learning, where the AI learns by watching good human examples, and RLHF reinforcement learning with human feedback.
Ah, the AI gets corrected or guided by humans or even other AIs.
Exactly. And these tools aren't just used at one point. They're used across the whole life cycle, from design right through to monitoring and auditing.
It sounds like a constant feedback loop. The paper puts a special focus on fairness, doesn't it?
It does. Fairness in AI has been under the microscope for a while, even before generative AI exploded.
Hmm.
Classifiers, prediction systems, they've always had potential bias issues. Interestingly, AI itself can sometimes be used to detect and reduce bias in other AI systems. But, and this is crucial, the tech solutions aren't enough on their own.
You need the organizational side too.
Absolutely. You need the stakeholder input, the developer education, diverse teams building the AI, community involvement, strong governance rules, ongoing research. All that stuff helps figure out what fairness even means in a specific situation and choose the right technical approach.
So the tech is a tool, but the organization guides how it's used for fairness. And I guess society has to decide what level of bias is even acceptable,
Yeah,
right?
that's a huge point the paper makes. What's an acceptable bias threshold? That's not a tech question. It's a societal one, an ethical one. And closely linked to fairness is transparency.
Why is transparency so vital for value alignment?
Well, if you can't understand why an AI did something, how can you tell if it's aligned with your values? How do you know if it was fair or
You
just?
can't check under the hood.
Exactly. Without some level of transparency, people just won't trust these systems, even if they're generally behaving well. It breeds suspicion.
So transparency builds trust and lets us verify the alignment.
Right, and the paper points out that the value alignment process itself actually produces transparency documentation.
Oh, like a record.
Yeah, records of which values were considered, what tests were run, what techniques were used, where the system should be used. And this whole thing is iterative. You learn from deployment, feed that back in, and keep refining both the tech and the organization around it.
A living process, not a one-off fix. Figure 3 in the paper lists some specific technical and organizational considerations. Can you give a couple of examples?
So on the technical side, the iterative process itself, protecting data privacy, bias detection methods, using RLHF, fairness testing protocols, curating training data carefully.
Then organize.
Things like those multi-stakeholder consultations, training for developers and users, using value-sensitive design from the start, creating that transparency documentation, and analyzing the deployment scenarios really thoroughly.
That gives a good picture of the different pieces involved. Now, thinking about this in practice, the paper talks about integrating human-centric principles throughout the whole AI lifecycle.
Yes, and that's a key shift. Aligning AI with human values means moving it away from just serving, say, private company interests towards genuinely benefiting humanity. It means actively prioritizing community interests.
Like, what kind of adjust?
Things like safety, security, protecting people's identities, and building practical tools that solve real community problems.
So, a deliberate shift in purpose.
Exactly. And making that shift needs both technical skill and a real human-centered view, understanding risks, understanding different cultures. It needs interdisciplinary collaboration. And because values change, the alignment process has to be flexible, adaptable, always taking input from stakeholders.
Designing with the community, not just for them, and being ready to change. The paper also talks about a value taxonomy. What's that for?
It's basically a way to sort the different places values come from. First, there are international agreements, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Big picture global stuff.
Right. Also things like the Geneva Conventions for Autonomous Weapons, the Council of Europe's AI framework, the OECD AI principles. These set a high-level ethical baseline grounded in human rights.
Okay, that's the top level. What else?
Then you have ethical principles and moral philosophy, the underlying ideas of utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics in the West, influenced by various religions, and Eastern traditions like Confucianism, Buddhism, Hinduism. The paper even mentions African ethics briefly. Understanding these different moral backgrounds is key for global AI governance.
Because different cultures might prioritize different ethical approaches.
Precisely. Can't assume one size fits all. Next level down is national laws and regulations. AI has to follow the law wherever it operates.
Like data protection laws.
Yeah, GDPR in Europe is a big one, the upcoming EU AI Act.
Well,
Also, specific laws, like Thailand's lèse-majesté affecting content generation or Singapore's law against online falsehoods. AI isn't above the law.
okay, so international principles, ethics, national laws. What else?
Social norms and common practices, the unwritten rules of society. For AI to be trusted, it often needs to respect these norms, how people communicate, what's considered polite or offensive. The World Values Survey is mentioned as a resource for understanding these cultural differences.
So, fitting in socially, not just legally. And the last category.
Human preferences in specific applications. This is about design choices based on user research, like making chatbots empathetic or friendly.
How they feel to interact with.
Yeah, using user studies, expert advice from psychology, human factors, and being transparent about how the AI learned these traits, especially if it wasn't explicitly programmed but picked up from data.
Wow, that's a lot of layers to consider. Figure 5 in the paper apparently ties these together.
Yeah, Figure 5 shows how these ethical foundations, legal rules, operational needs, and community concerns all feed into value alignment. It reinforces that you need a holistic view.
And existing guidelines push for integrating responsibility principles throughout the AI lifecycle, right? What are those key principles again?
Things like being explainable, so we know how it decides, transparent seeing the data and algorithms, and robust, reliable, and secure. The goal is always empowering humans, maintaining our oversight and self-determination.
Understandable, trustworthy, controllable AI. The paper also lays out a value alignment process in Table 1. Can you walk us through the main phases?
Sure. It's broken into three main stages. First is conception and analysis. This is where you figure out the key values through stakeholder talks, assess risks, translate broad values into specific rules like fairness, meaning equal access, and keep stakeholders involved.
Setting the foundation. What's next?
Design and development. This is where you actually build the values in. Using design strategies for bias mitigation, setting technical specs for things like secure data handling for privacy, prototyping, user testing for feedback, and setting performance metrics that reflect the human values.
Making it real in the tech. And the final phase.
Deployment, operation, and use. Once it's out there, you need continuous monitoring to make sure it stays aligned, checking its robustness, gathering user feedback on value issues, and doing compliance audits against ethical and legal standards.
So it never really stops. It's constant vigilance and adaptation. Now, what helps make all this actually happen? The paper talks about enablers.
Right, four key things that facilitate value alignment. First, and we've hit this a few times, is continuous stakeholder engagement. You just can't do responsible AI in a silo.
Need those diverse voices. What's number 2?
Frameworks and guidelines. These provide the structure, the best practices, the tools to actually do ethical, value-aligned AI. They help navigate the complexity, boost transparency, and build trust.
The rulebooks and roadmaps. Third.
Human engagement. This goes beyond just initial talks. It's about ongoing feedback loops, adapting the AI based on human input, using techniques like inverse reinforcement learning or value-based design, and participatory design where users actively shape the AI.
Keeping humans in the loop, guiding the AI's evolution. And the last enabler.
Robust audits and assessments. These are critical for checking that the AI consistently sticks to the agreed values and ethical standards over time. They evaluate if it's working as intended, value-wise, and spot any problems.
The formal checkups to make sure it's staying on track. The paper details what makes audits effective too.
Yeah, several things. Having both independent and internal reviews, objectivity plus context. Needing auditors with actual technical expertise. Using shared national or international standards for consistency. Assessing explainability is key for trust. Audits should cover the whole life cycle, be comprehensive. And continuous monitoring plus transparent reporting of findings are vital to drive improvement and accountability. Figure 6 sums these enablers up nicely.
It really paints a picture of a continuous, multi-layered effort needed to keep AI aligned. Okay, one last big topic. The link between value alignment and AI ethics, red lines. What are those?
Red lines are the absolute non-negotiables. The boundaries AI must never cross. They're directly tied to value alignment. They represent the hard limits that the alignment process is designed to respect.
The lines in the sand, what's their main job?
To enforce fundamental ethical standards and protect human rights and societal norms. For instance, a red line might ban AIs from making decisions that cause serious harm without human oversight, or prevent discriminatory practices based on protected characteristics. Embedding values like fairness and transparency is how you prevent crossing these lines in the first place.
So value alignment is the work you do inside the red lines. The paper mentions needing both global and local red lines. Why both?
Global red lines create a universal baseline fundamental rights everyone agrees on. But local contexts matter. What's ethically tricky in one application or culture might be different elsewhere. So you might need tailored local red lines too.
Makes sense. Context is everything. How do you actually establish those specific local red lines?
The paper suggests a process: systematic risk assessments to identify boundaries, stakeholder involvement to get consensus, compliance audits with detailed records, real-time monitoring and alerts, strong pre-deployment validation, transparency about how red lines are enforced, clear human oversight and intervention plans, and adaptive governance frameworks that can change over time with stakeholder input.
A very careful ongoing process. And the paper wraps up by saying balancing the operational needs with human values is key for ethical, reliable AI.
Exactly. The big takeaway is AI value alignment is complex but absolutely essential. It needs ethical principles baked in everywhere, supported by frameworks, human engagement, organizational change, and audits. Continuous stakeholder input, rigorous checks, adapting to cultural differences, they're all vital. And the link to red lines is critical for preventing harm and building trust.
This has been incredibly insightful, really unpacking that WE white paper. It's clear making AI work for humanity is a huge, ongoing job. So, for everyone listening, here's something to chew on. Given how complex human values are and how fast AI is changing, what do you think are the biggest long-term challenges in keeping AI aligned with our values? And what role should individuals like us play in this whole process?
And if you want to dig even deeper, the white paper has a great appendix full of resources, government initiatives, company guidelines, academic work, professional associations, plenty more to explore there.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.